clover cattle are on red clover silage and grass cattle are just on grass silage. Both treatments got 1.5 kilos a meal. And again, he's seen a 0.1 average daily gain greater for the red clover cattle than the grass silage cattle. So by the time they turned out, they had 14 kilos extra weaning weight and a further 12 kilos extra from the winter silages. So it was a 26 kilo heavier live weight combined by the time they're turned out there in spring.
Hello and welcome to the Beef Edge, the Teagasc Beef Podcast, for all your latest news, information and advice for Irish beef farmers. I'm Catherine Egan, and on this week's episode I'm joined by Teagasc researcher Peter Doyle to get an update on the Derrypatrick herd with breeding season underway. Peter, can you give listeners a quick overview of the Derrypatrick herd and how it has evolved over the last number of years?
So the Derrypatrick herd is a research herd. It's running 80 suckler cows and it brings all progeny through to beef. I suppose, the role of the herd is to look at the new technologies like your clover and your animal genetics and to quantify, I suppose, do they work in a practical suckler calf to beef system. So we also run different systems to see if they have a role in the future, not for Irish beef farming. Like, for example, we're currently looking, say, at systems that finish steers and heifers off grass at 19 months of age. So we'd have two Walsh scholars, students, Peter Bennett and Sarah Armstrong, and I suppose that they're completing their studies on factors like that in this herd.
I suppose it's been a difficult spring for farmers across the country, and thankfully things have changed in recent weeks. Can you just talk through how you manage grass to date on the farm?
Yeah, I suppose, you have right. It's been difficult spring, I suppose. I suppose when you talk about managing grass and I suppose getting cattle out of grass in a difficult spring, a priority for us was to get the first calvers out of grass as soon as possible. So we know these first calvers, they can take over 70 days to come back cycling after calving, whereas a suckler cow will typically take 50-55 days. So those first calvers can quickly fall out of the system if they're not going back and calf, they're taking too long to go back and calf. So we got them out even when weather was a bit, I suppose, challenging. We got them out to grass at the end of February. And we're supposed to aim to get good quality spring bred grass with 2 kilos ahead into those first calvers, getting back cycling as soon as we could. I suppose the added advantage is that then they get a few paddocks grazed for us. So I suppose it allows them paddocks to come back in time for the second rotation, because on this farm, having enough grass back for second rotation is so important, but that would be difficult to do if you didn't get, I suppose, a few paddocks grazed off early in the season. So overall in our first rotation this year, we did graze 100% of the grazing ground and we grazed about 70% of the silage ground. So any silage ground that had a light cover, it didn't get grazed.
And I suppose looking at the situation across the country, you're tracking weekly as well and monthly as to what's happening on the farm. What are the key KPIs that you're looking at when it comes to managing grass?
Yeah, I suppose actually I've done a grass walk there today. We're averaging, I suppose, an average farm cover of 750. So I would be aiming to be in that range of 750 or 650 to 750, I suppose, of a farm cover, or say in days ahead terms be around 11 to 14 days. But I suppose the main thing is checking, I suppose, is our current growth above or below our herd's demand, and check what the predicted growth is for the coming weeks. And I suppose that'll give us an indication where the farm cover will be next week. I also have to be thinking ahead. So if our days ahead is increasing, for example, say growth, we know growth is ahead of demand, then we'll be thinking about taking out grass. But if our growth will be below demand and our days ahead are already getting tight down near 11 days, we'd know at that stage and maybe to graze cows maybe a little bit more tighter to slow them down or to introduce silage either,
And you mentioned there you have 70% of the silage ground grazed.
Yeah.
Like a lot of farmers, you did well, but only 30% wasn't grazed. How will that 30% of the silage ground be managed any differently, or was it fertilised any differently, or can you just talk through what the plan is?
Yeah, so for those the 30% that wasn't grazed that silage ground, that was actually grazed last December by Whelan's. So it still has a real low cover on it. So when it's such a small amount, we'll probably just throw it in with that silage. A bit of that ground will go for bulk silage for feeding suckler cows. But in terms of say the red clover ground, some of that didn't get grazed, so we're going to cut that now very soon, because we need that to be good quality, because if it's going for quality cuts, obviously there might be a little bit of a dead butt there. So you want to be cutting it 10 to 14 days earlier to kind of get the same DMD as something that was cut, say, or grazed in spring, if you know what I mean.
And how has that red clover silage been managed and fertilised to date?
Yeah, so I suppose, as I said, look, we got half the red clover ground graze, and we didn't get the other half graze. So, as in the part we didn't graze, it had a really low cover on it, and the part we did graze, it had a heavy cover on it over the winter. So we were eager to get that graze down in spring, just so the clover didn't die out. Um, and I suppose we put 2.5 or 3,000 gallons of slurry to the acre on all of the red clover ground, because it still had a low enough cover to put slurry on it, even if the stuff wasn't grazed. So we'll be aiming to cut that there now, probably around 15th of May. And after we cut it, we will be we'll put out either 2,500 gallons of slurry or a 0730, maybe a 2.5 bags to the acre, depending how weather is. If it's really dry, I just go with the 2.5 bags of 0730 to the acre. But the main thing is you have to remember that red clover ground, and it needs P and K. It's very hungry for it. And for the nitrogen, a little bit of nitrogen with your red clover ground, like through cattle slurry, is no harm in spring when the fixation hasn't started. Or say half a bag for urea if you couldn't get the slurry out. But for your second and third cuts, it doesn't need any nitrogen because it's well capable of fixing its own nitrogen by that stage of the year. And look, but the cutting date is really important with that red clover. But like if we generally cut the 15th of May, then we do the second cut, say the start to middle of July, and the third cut by the end of August. And if you didn't, I suppose, follow a similar regime, the third cut could end up being in the middle or end of September, and it can be getting tricky that time of the year to get a good will to get a preserve right. If you run into tricky weather conditions, so if you kind of have to start cutting it early to finish your third cut in time as well.
That's great, Peter. I suppose breeding season is underway on the farm at the moment. How has that been going so far?
Yeah, we started on the 1st of May, and I suppose the important thing for us is to do a pre-breeding scan on the 90 cows and the 10 replacement heifers, or the 85 cows and the 10 replacement heifers before we started. So look, with those 10 replacement heifers, 5 of the 10 of them actually weren't cycling there on the 1st of May. Now, partially, some of that was my fault. There was 4 heifers that I bought in, probably a little bit too late, and I didn't get them up on a good plain nutrition quick enough. So look at there are 4 of them that weren't cycling. And I suppose look at actually I was chatting to you earlier there about them first calvers. We got them out early and had them on good grass and 2 kilos of meal. But still, of the 21st calvers we had this year, and 9 of them were not cycling on the 1st of May. Now 4 of them did calve after Patrick's Day, so we can excuse them. But we did have 11 of them calving, or I should say, it's naturally cycling on the 1st of May. So I suppose that is a positive for first calvers. So at least that gives them the best chance to get back and calf quickly and stay within the system. And I suppose there was a few cows, about 8% of the cows had cysts, and 6% of the cows were I suppose a little bit dirty inside as well. So the vet was there doing the scans with us. So we had, I suppose, the appropriate measures there, I suppose, to fix those cows and get them in calf. And that's so important just to get those cows right before breeding begins. It just gives us a good chance now to have good conception rates and submission rates this year.
And that's key part, I suppose, Peter, as you mentioned there, as part of the pre-breeding scan. What's the plan for those heifers and the cows that weren't cycling? What action has been taken with those?
Yeah, so I suppose I was chatting with the vet, and with the cows, with the heifers not cycling, I suppose he advised us to put all the heifers on a fixed time AI protocol. So we have them now on a synchronization program, and we're actually AIing them now at the moment as we speak. And with the cows that weren't cycling, there's 10 of them that were over 42 days calved. So of those that were 42 days calved, they're also on a synchronization program. But the ones that are less than 42 days calved, we're going to wait a little while on those, see if they're coming naturally cycling, and if not, we'll intervene. So we'll probably do another scan on week 4. So say after 3 weeks of breeding is complete, anything that's not submitted for AI, the vet will come out and do another scan on those remaining cows. But generally, that'll be less than 10% of the animals.
It really highlights the importance of a pre-breeding scan, Peter.
Yeah.
What are the key traits that you're focusing on when you're selecting the sires for the herd?
Yeah, so look, obviously, for our look, I heard a lot of them at cows are limousine Friesian. So look, their carcass weight PTAs will be down near 10 kilos. So we're looking for a bull that can certainly improve the carcass potential of the progeny. So we're, I suppose the trials we're doing this year, it involves a lot of Charolais bulls. So the Charolais bulls we're picking, nearly all of them have a carcass weight PTA of over 40 kilos. So that's like 5 star for carcass weight for anyone that's unsure what PT is. So that's really important for us to have weight on the animal. Carcass conformation, they're generally all over carcass conformation of 2.0, which would also be close to 5 stars. So and look, obviously, like the calving difficulty is important to look at. So look at, I suppose, with your calving difficulty is knowing what suits your cows. So for us, we've been experimenting with easy and hard calving bulls over, I suppose, the last 2 or 3 years, and I suppose we found a threshold that sort of suits our system. But overall, look, the bulls we're using from say NCBC, we have some of the straws are from previous years that we had in the tank, and some of them are ones we got this year. So we have Gold Star Ludwig and Omega and Ricky from NCBC, and then from Dovea we have Le Bonvo, we have Bordorfis, and we have Supreme, and we have also Mass there from Eurogene. So that's the Charlotte Bulls, and then with the and actually they're averaging a terminal index of €170 with the limousine bulls. We have Grenache from the NCBC. We have Ivor from Dovea. We had straws from him back in the tank from before, and then we have Loyal as well from Bova. So look, they're easy calving. They're averaging about 6.5% calving difficulty for heifers, those limousine bulls, whereas the Charlotte bulls that are being used on the cows, they're averaging around 7% calving difficulty for our cows.
That's great, Peter. And what are you using as heat detection aids? And can you just talk through the process of AI being used in the herd?
Yeah, so for heat detection, well, obviously, yeah, the tail paint is number one, and then number two, we've vasectomized bulls. So we purchased them in, and we had them vasectomized about 8 weeks before breeding began. And look, at the main thing is keeping the tail paint topped up on the cows and make sure that the chin ball is properly filled with ink with the teaser bowl. So it makes it very easy to see a cow. She's no tail paint left on her and plenty of ink from the chin ball all over her back. Then we see her that evening, we lay her the following morning, and if we see her in the morning after being bulling, we lay her that evening. So we generally do the AM PM rule for the first 3 weeks, and we'll do once day AI for the last 6 weeks. So it's 9 weeks in total that pre-breeding scan. We're going blood sampling into cows there now this week as well, just to look at mineral deficiencies because some of them do look a little bit rusty coloured in the coat. So I just wanted to get that checked out.
And based on those results, you'll take action if there is any deficiencies in the herd.
I will, yeah.
Looking at the store cattle that's on the farm, and I suppose the calves at foot there, what are the key performance targets that you're aiming for this year?
Yeah, so I suppose look with the calves, I suppose last year we achieved 1.3 kilos per day for the 200-day weight. So I'd certainly be open to try achieve that again this year. And I suppose look with the bullocks and the heifers then, they're actually the steers or the bullocks are currently weighing 512 kilos. So we're very happy with that weight. So Peter Bennett and MJ was weighing them there yesterday. So look, we would like to have them maybe if we can get to 630 kilos live weight on those steers and bullocks by the end of the grazing season on grazed grass or grass clover, we'd be very happy with that. The heifers, they're averaging 484 kilos at the moment. So we would like them maybe at 590 kilo live weight by the end of the grazing season.
And in comparison, what were the key findings from the cattle that were finished last year?
Yeah, so last year, I suppose, look, Peter Bennett, he was running a grass only versus a grass clover system for his watch collar studies. And I suppose, look, what he found, it was a full suckler calf to beef system. So cows and calves are on grass white clover swards compared to cows and calves on grass only swards. There's a 14 kilo heavier weaning weight for those on the white clover swards. So that's a huge benefit. And then when he brought them into the shed, those calves after weaning, there's clover cattle are on red clover silage, and grass cattle are just on grass silage. Both treatments got 1.5 kg of meal. And again, he's seen a 0.1 average daily gain greater for the red clover cattle than the grass silage cattle. So by the time they turned out, they had 14 kilos extra weaning weight, and a further 12 kilos extra from the winter silages. So it was a 26 kilo heavier live weight combined by the time they turned out there in spring. And there wasn't too much of a difference in growth over that second grazing season. So by the time they're finished, there's about I think it came to close to there's close to a 10 kilo carcass weight or 11 kilo carcass weight in favour of the clover cattle and steers and heifers than the grass ones. So it was great to see. Today's beef price, that's probably worth over €70 per head, but you also had a huge saving in fertilizer on the clover system. That only got half the fertilizer than the grass only system.
What's the plan going forward for research being carried out in the coming years with the herd?
Yeah, well, I suppose at the moment, like Sarah Armstrong is currently doing her Welsh Scholar studies and looking at the methane emissions from, I suppose, a lot of the suckler beef cattle. So, like at the moment, our, I suppose, way of calculating methane emissions from our suckler herd from a governmental point of view is from international coefficients based on what has been achieved from, say, methane emissions from cattle on an international basis. But we want to look specifically at what our own Irish cattle are producing. So Sarah is doing a lot of that work there this year and last year. And I suppose, look at going forward, we will still continue the clover research, but we probably won't be feeding any meal to those cattle on the red clover system. We're going to be tweaking the systems a little bit because we're seeing we're probably wasting a bit of concentrates on those red clover cattle over the first winter because we're nearly growing too well on red clover plus meal and not getting that compensated growth at grass. And I suppose, we've been currently running systems we've seen in Peter Bennett's studies where we're easily finishing the early maturing bullocks and early maturing heifers, some of the late maturing heifers too, off grass with no meal at 19 months of age, which is a great result. But obviously, it's a little bit more challenging to have the late maturing bullocks finished off grass at 19 months. So a lot of the research now going forward is going to look at trying to find a system where we can still have a low finishing age, but still get very good carcass weights and fat scores on those bullocks, particularly the Charolais bullocks and Limousin bullocks off grass. So we'll probably be looking at different meal finishing strategies and that.
I'm sure there'll be lots of great information from that can be applied on farm, particularly with the red clover. A lot has gone in the last number of years. And as you said, the meal finishing strategies there on those steers. Listeners will have an opportunity, Peter, to see firsthand what's happening in Grange and hear more about what you're after discussing there on Wednesday, the 1st of July at Beef 2026.
Look, please do come up to Grange on that day. Look, it's a big day and there's a lot of work going into it. And I suppose, a lot of the talk we're doing on clover, I mean, it has great benefits, but you need to know how to manage it. And we will be showcasing that at Beef 2026. Also, in terms of the animal genetics, there'll be multiple displays there on the day in terms of in terms of demos on producing high CBV cattle and I suppose how to select animals for breeding and replacements, etc. So look, there's plenty there on the day, and we'll have lots of demos. There's a lot of feedback from previous years for us to have more demos and more cattle. So we're certainly going to act on that as well.
A key date for the diary, Peter, Wednesday the 1st of July 2026 for the Teagasc Grange Open Day, Beef 2026. So thanks very much, Peter, for joining me today.
No, thanks very much, Catherine. And I'd just like to thank all the staff there in the Derrypatrick that are helping out, like so Chrissy, the farm staff, and Eddie Mulligan, the farm manager, and the technicians like MJ Edwin and John Jones, and obviously the two students, Sarah and Peter, for all the work there throughout the year as well.
That's all for this week's episode, and my thanks to Peter for joining me on the show. You can catch up on all other shows and interviews from the Beef Edge podcast on the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie, or you can listen on Apple as well as Spotify. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe so you never miss the show. For all other updates from our beef programme, keep an eye on our Twitter and Facebook pages. Until next time, I'm Catherine Egan, and thanks for listening.